Good morning. Well, it's just a little past 10, so we'll go ahead and get started. More people can start trickling in, and it's good to have our people remotely looking at us. Somebody called me up and said, "Hey, there's no sound." So I had to ask the technician, "Why is there no sound?" Jeff says, "Because the mic's not on." So anyway, it's really good to see so many of you out today. Advancement, we're the people, right? We're all about relationships. We're all about inclusion. And so it's great to start this conversation. As you know, our executive committee has been considering what we can do to respond to William & Mary's task force on race and relations. And we've even started our own inclusion and diversity committee here at Advancement. It's our desire to create a working environment that's inclusive and representative of the world in which we work. We've made a decision that we're going to move forward. We're going to try to be a leader with regard to diversity and inclusion around the campus and within the field of philanthropy. Our guest today, John Elder Robson, grew up in 1960 before the Asperger diagnosis was a common thing. In fact, he wasn't diagnosed until he was 40 years old. As you can imagine, being perceived as he was growing up as lazy or rude, he must have struggled through school and in fact finally had to drop out. However, he was able to channel his amazing abilities with mechanics and machinery into some pretty amazing and enviable careers. How many people can say that they built equipment for Pink Floyd's sound company? Or how about traveling with the band Kiss and creating special effects guitars? I mean, I'm so jealous. He also said he's worked with Milton Bradley on games, and then even decided to go into a career, open up his own repair shop fixing cars. But his cars are Bentleys, Rolls Royces, BMWs, Mercedes. Some of us just hope to see some of those. He's also a New York best-selling author of Look Me in the Eye, Be Different, Adventures of a Free-Rein Aspergian, Raising Cubby, and his latest book, Switched On. As a scholar in residence, he's following a long-time family tradition of sorts. He found out through his ancestry that his eighth grandfather, that would be great, is that eight? Was probably the first scholar in residence here at William & Mary under James Blair. So he is the co-chair of the Neurodiversity Working Group. Mr. Robson co-teaches the course on neurodiversity, and he speaks regularly with groups on campus and in the university. He is widely known as an advocate for people with autism and neurological differences. And we are privileged to have him speak today with us about inclusion and diversity at University Advancement. We really need to learn how to better engage, include, and appreciate our neurodiverse population in our lives, our workplace, and in our efforts. Please help me welcome John Elder Robson.
Well, good morning, folks. So, the story that brings me to William & Mary started back in England in the early 1600s. Over there, a country minister was raising his family in a small stone church in the Middle England, and the English Civil War came along. The minister had brothers who were in the church. He had brothers who were rebels against the church, and family was kind of on both sides of the conflict, plus they were on kind of a third outlaw side. When his children were growing up, on more than one occasion, armed men took over the church, and they preached whatever their radical religion was. The kids were affected in different ways by that. One of the kids went on to follow in his father's footsteps. He went to Oxford to study theology. Another became a prominent Quaker rebel. You think of Quakers as sort of peace-loving people today, but Quakers were like the terrorists of the 1600s when they started out. And the one who went to school, he didn't stay in school. He had other things to do, so after being at Oxford a year, he left. But he still wanted to be a preacher. However, after the Civil War had ended, there was a surplus of preachers, and you couldn't be a preacher unless you could get a bishop to ordain you, and you couldn't get ordained unless you were a graduate of one of the colleges, Oxford or Cambridge. So he went to the south of England, where he found a bishop that was friendly with his family and got the guy to ordain him anyway. Now, once you were ordained, you couldn't preach unless you got appointed to what they called a living. It meant you had charge of a church, and you could support yourself off the revenue from the church lands. And couldn't get that either without having these credentials. So he went back to the bishop right at Oxford, where he had dropped out of school, and talked that bishop into giving him the credit for being an Oxford graduate. And with that, he got appointed to a living. And he took that living, and then he was inspired by an earlier minister who had preached alongside his father. And that man told him of his dream of coming to the colonies and converting Indians and converting the foreign peoples. And with that living, he found himself another minister to take his place, and he gave that minister half the living, and he sailed for America. And he got himself appointed here at the newly formed Bruton Parish Church. So he came here as a kind of an outlaw, and yet he became the senior clergyman in America at that time. When he came here, he was appointed to the pulpit here at Bruton Parish, but almost immediately after, because of his eloquence and training, he also took over the pulpit at Jamestown, which was at that time the colonial capital. And he served several parishes for 14 years until he got sick and died. He had a son, and his son was orphaned at the time of Blair's arrival here and Blair's starting of William and Mary. Blair took the son in. I wondered why Blair would take in the son of a minister with kind of nothing. And when I began to research it, I found that this minister who had connived himself the living and the credentials and all those other things and come to America and set up shop, he died as one of the richer men in Virginia. And actually, when his son was orphaned, his wife had one of the largest estates probated in York County in those years. So that's why Blair took him in. And he was one of Blair's favorite pupils. We know that because in 1699, he was one of 4 scholars in residence at this college. The college had a couple masters. They were the English-trained faculty, and it had the scholars who were the Virginia-trained faculty. Blair encouraged him to study law, presumably because he didn't want to study theology, which is what his father had done and what Blair had done. He went to England and studied law for a year, Now, in those years, you could get a law degree if you wanted, but most lawyers did what this fellow did, and he just studied until he felt like he'd learned enough and came back here and set up shop, and when you said you were a lawyer, you were. And being a lawyer, he served the college well. He was this college's first counsel, and he also represented Williamsburg in the House of Burgesses for most of the rest of his life. He had sons and daughters. He's best known as the grandfather of Martha Washington today to historians, but he's also the grandfather to me and a great many other people. So he had this line of ministers that descended from him, and he had lines of people that got involved in politics. His family established a church that ultimately went on to preach rebellion and dissent to several generations of people. That was the church of Jefferson. It was a church of Patrick Henry. And Patrick Henry being another of my ancestors. And today, scholars speculate that Patrick Henry is actually an autistic person based on some of his writings and accounts of his behavior. They say that about Jefferson now. I wondered if that were true about my ancestors, Roland and Orlando Jones. And people were quick to say, well, how can you really ever know? Just because you're autistic doesn't mean that your eighth grandfathers are autistic. But there's more to it than that. Because now, at my age, I can look at 5 generations of my family. I have an autistic son. I have autistic cousins. I had an autistic father, autistic uncles. And then I go back to my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and great-uncles, so I can see 5 generations of autistic people in my family, and that is pointing back at the Joneses here in Virginia, and also points at Patrick Henry and others that are back here in colonial Virginia. So, if I can see autism in 5 generations of my family, to speculate that an 8th grandfather in that line might be autistic too, that doesn't sound so far-fetched anymore. And one of the things that really gives pause for thought, that all of you ought to be thinking about here, is somehow these ancestors of mine, it is generally agreed, were great men, and they were instrumental in the establishment of Virginia. Now, over at colonial Williamsburg, they like to kind of talk the party line. You know, they say that Roland Jones was a hard-nosed Anglican minister, and that's the only way he could have been appointed here to preach in a church. They portray him as a sort of a serious, solid Anglican. In fact, he was nothing of the sort. In fact, his sister, all his life, was a leading Quaker dissenter here in Virginia. And he was always a little bit on the edge, but he was a good enough preacher that he managed to hold the pulpit here in the Capitol. So, I mean, he was clearly a complex guy. He was not, though, the straight-laced, solid citizen that colonial Williamsburg would have us believe. And of course, I look at that and I think, well, if he was an autistic guy, it would make sense that that's how he would be. So we have, on the one hand, these ancestors of mine that were instrumental in the establishment of this community, and we have the present-day descendants, and we can't even graduate from high school. You know, I come here to teach at this college, and we have these reviews that the students do of the teachers. And your students here consistently give me high marks for teaching. And yet, I would not qualify for entrance to this college or any other good college in this country. So when I look at that and I look at the history, I've begun to ask myself, what's wrong with that picture? Do you believe that people like me got dumber or less capable? Or do you believe that society has changed to exclude us? You may not realize it, but I am perhaps the only person teaching a course on science or humanities at a major American university who has no credentials to do so from another educational institution. Now, some people would say that that is a mark of exceptionality. And I used to think that, well, maybe that was so as a vanity. Now I realize that that's not true. What that is it shows how successfully a whole class of people has been locked out of participation, first in education and then in participation in industry and work in America. We're locked out because we can't conform to the rules necessary to get out of high school, and because we can't do that, we can't get into undergraduate school, and because we can't do that, we can't get into graduate school, and without those things, we can't get jobs. I am probably the last generation of people who was able to get jobs without that. Although actually, I say that, but you know, my son, who's autistic and also dropped out of school, is now an internet millionaire, having made a cryptocurrency online. So actually, my son is sort of following in the same footsteps. And but for most of us, we really are effectively locked out of participation because we can't do these things. And yet, every time I go to a college and speak, the students say, oh, I'm good to have around, they like me around. But there's no college personnel department that would hire me. So it's like, what's wrong with that? And that's the challenge that all of you folks face. How do you recruit people like me to teach and operate schools like this? And how do you recruit more of my kind to be students? And you might think, why would you want people like us? I think that an argument can be made that folks like me, autistic people, we have existed in humanity for thousands and thousands of years. Neurological diversity is a part of human diversity. Just like we have people of different races, we have people with different hair colors, we have tall people, short people, fat people, thin people. We too are a part of diversity. And it is only recently that the advance of technology has rendered us irrelevant. Or at least that's how people think. I don't actually agree that we're irrelevant, but the education system seems to think that. You heard that I worked in audio engineering. And what I did, I created sound effects at first. I created sound effects by teaching myself what the waveforms of music looked like. And I taught myself how those waveforms were modified by different sound effects. And then I taught myself how to imagine the reverse, what a waveform would sound like. And then I taught myself to imagine how circuits would transform the waves. And when I put all those pieces together, I could imagine what a circuit would sound like, and I could build the circuit, verify if it sounded like I imagined, and I could refine my insight and go build more. And so today, the level of mathematics to describe the circuits that I would design is something that would challenge our graduate students here. I could never do that mathematics to 10 decimal places like the grad students here could do with a computer, but I could do it well enough to make my circuits work. At the time, people would say to me, well, you're just a lucky experimenter. You're not a real engineer. You don't know any mathematics. But the proof is in the pudding, because all that stuff that I designed has entertained millions and millions of people in the last 35 years. And it absolutely works. And you can say what you will about how I designed it. I was criticized at another university by a math professor who said, well, it's true, you don't know any math. How can you say that you're an engineer? You know, math, to be an engineer, you've got to know calculus. And calculus came to us from this guy, Newton. He's praised as the inventor of calculus. Well, today, people describe Newton, based on the many accounts of his behavior, as a person who was almost certainly autistic. So that professor said that to me, and I said, maybe you've got it wrong. Maybe Newton is a guy like me who had the calculus in his mind all along. Maybe he could imagine the ripples of waves on a pond, and he could imagine the movements of things, and he could manipulate those waves in his mind. And he wanted a way to express that to people like you who couldn't see that in his mind. And he wrote that down, and that became calculus, and that was Newton's gift to everyone else. He could teach people who didn't have it in their heads how to do those things. And I think that's true. I think that Newton is a person who was born with the calculus in his head, just as I am, and just as many, many other autistic people are. There are many, many autistic people with other extraordinary mathematical abilities. For example, a psychiatrist did a study of people in institutions in England whose IQs averaged around 50. The people couldn't take care of themselves. They couldn't live independently. And a significant fraction of them, more than 10% of them, turn out to have extraordinary calendar calculating abilities of some sort. So you can go to these guys who can't dress themselves, they can't talk, they haven't got a job, and you can say, what day was it on January 7th, 1512? And they can stand there for a moment and they can give you the answer. And nobody knows how that happens. Nobody knows how people like me can manipulate waveforms in our heads. I don't think of it as doing mathematics. I don't understand any of the symbols in a calculus textbook, but I can manipulate waves just the same. And that was what made me successful. And I suggest to you that those kinds of abilities, which are not present in typical people, are present in people with these neurological differences. So all of us have different abilities to do things. Look at dyslexic people, and you think that dyslexic people read backwards, and today they are crippled as readers. But there are situations where reading backwards gives you a different insight on something. And maybe if everybody else is reading forward and they can't figure the problem out, the guy who reads backward, the solution will be obvious to him. So the way I see it now, people like us may have been disadvantaged 99% of the time. We may have seemed physically crippled. We may not have spoken well. We may have acted weird most of the time. But for the things we could do, no one else could do them. And we were valuable. And people kept us around. That, I think, is why my ancestors were able to be successful in the church, because in the Middle Ages and before, the church was the home of science. And what's happened in the last few hundred years is the church of science has moved off in its own way and the church has separated. But for all of history before that, science and logic found a home in the church, and I think it was a home to many, many autistic people. And it brought me here. So I think, what can we do to bring that back? What can we do to show that there's value to that? Because the thing is, even though those students in math class can do the calculus that I couldn't do to describe my circuits, how many of those students are going to think the circuits up in the first place? That's the thing. Autistic people, people with dyslexia, people with ADHD, people with other neurological differences bring the world something vital. We are able to educate ourselves many times, as I have shown, but we are tremendously advantaged by having the resources of an educational institution. I, for example, could not have learned the signal processing skills that I have if my parents weren't professors at the University of Massachusetts. The way I learned everything I learned, even though I taught myself with the assistance of grad students, with the assistance of professors who thought, yeah, I was a neat kid and they answered my question, and with the assistance of the university that unwittingly and unwillingly made its labs available for me and gave me test equipment and electronic devices to destroy in the pursuit of knowledge. And so I would be nowhere if it weren't for a college. I'm a college-educated person, but a self-college educated person. The thing is, all these ancestors of mine, they're the same way. They're also self-educated people. And if they were great people, why would you think that we can't be that way today? So the question that this institution and every other college that wants to cultivate neurologically different people faces is, how do we identify the young people who are bright but different and capable? The people who have the potential to come into school and be absolute stars, whether it's in the researching of history or it's in computer science or it's in physics or it's in chemistry. They can't pass the normal tests. Maybe they won't even take the normal tests because they say it's bullshit, it's stupid, and they're not going to do it. How are we going to find those people and bring them in here? And once we do bring them in here, what are we going to do to create an atmosphere that not only retains those students, but allows them to be maximally successful? Now remember that autistic people, people with other neurodiverse conditions, have always existed side by side with the rest of humanity. This idea that we are excluded and different is really, for the most part, a modern construct. Autistic people weren't even recognized. How did you even know dyslexia existed in 1700? So today, a guy who wants to be a doctor, he can't be a doctor unless he can learn to read. You can't do that today. But in 1700s, you could become a doctor without knowing how to read, and you could be a very good doctor. So we've lost something there. We've lost something, and we've cut those people out. How are we going to bring them in? And I think for you, too, those of you in advancement and development, the pressing question for you starts with the idea that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. For every bright autistic person you see like me, there is a high likelihood that there is a bright autistic child behind him and an autistic dad in back of him. There is also a significant likelihood that there is a profoundly disabled autistic child behind him or on either side. We are much more likely than the general population to have a much broader spread of intelligence and capability in our family trees. But what it means for you in a practical sense is that for every autistic student who comes here, there is likely an autistic family member out there somewhere in the wings. And autistic people have really enjoyed a mix of success. The popular public health statistics says that 80% of autistic people are unemployed. But of the autistic people who are employed, I would suggest to you that a fair percentage of us are more successful than the average person, and a small percentage of us are among the most successful people in the world. So if you think then, who could support this college? There are autistic people who could carry the whole budget of this place out there. And the question would be how to cultivate that. Now the problem that you're going to have when you go out and do that is the cultural shame around autism, dyslexia, ADHD, because so many people have children who are diagnosed with autism or ADHD or whatever, and they hear that and they think it's like being told their kid's got syphilis. And Jesus Christ, it's bad enough that the kid has it. You're not going to talk about it with me. I'm a successful business owner. Most parents of kids who are going to be sending students to school here are of an age where if they are like me, they're a person who is articulate and well-spoken, even if they are themselves autistic, and there are many autistic people who speak like me, they're not going to know it because they grew up just like I did before autism was recognized in speaking people in America. So you got this population of parents who didn't know about their own autism. They found out about their child's autism. And when they found out about their child's autism, they were told it was something to be ashamed of. They were told, oh, your child's poisoned by vaccine, your child's poisoned by mercury, he's poisoned by lead. They were told all kinds of ugly stuff to make them feel bad about it. It was an unwitting thing, but that's the result. So those parents may not be very eager to embrace neurodiversity. What about the grandparents? As we go back one more generation, the grandparents statistically are even more likely to be able to be wealthy donors to the university on behalf of their grandkids. But those people are even less likely to be aware of neurodiversity as a concept and to be aware of perhaps autism in themselves. So I think the big challenge you're going to face is if you put me in a room with the parents of a number of these autistic kids that come to campus, I would see autism in their families. I could say something like that to them because they would look at me as a successful guy, and for me to compare myself to them is not necessarily insulting or offensive. I'm not sure how you folks are going to open the door to a conversation about autism in the parents' generation, except to say that autism's always been here. So it's not a question of where are the autistic people in the generation that was born in the 50s, the 30s, or the 1700s. The question is, what did those people do? Because they were absolutely there. And I'm not sure what to say to you about how to connect individually with the people. What I think you can do is you can talk about the idea of making this college a place that's going to welcome autistic people once they're here. You can get together with admissions, and together we can confront the problem of how do we choose neurodiverse applicants to the university who don't conform to the standards of the present application process. I wish I had an answer for you to just say, well, this is how we do it. Unfortunately, I do not know how we do it. The process of gaining admission to this school in 1700 was clearly very different from how you gain admission today. And I don't know that answer, but I think that together we can work on finding a solution and we can figure that out. I think that another thing that you could do that would be really great is you could recognize that there is neurological diversity among the faculty. If autism affects between 1 and 2% of the population, there is no reason to believe that you folks in this particular university or this particular job are materially different in that distribution. So that says that there are some dozens, probably, of neurologically different faculty. Some of those people may be aware of their difference. Many of those people, like me, probably grew up ashamed of the difference because they too were told that they were stupid or deficient, and finally they made it through school and they've got jobs in a university and they just want to leave that behind. But if we can get those people to come out of the closet and say, yes, I am an autistic guy, and maybe I've got an autistic son too. And being autistic helps me do my job at William and Mary. Can you imagine how much that will mean to students? It means a lot. Students at this school, they come to me because I'm an autistic guy, and they can talk to me about autism issues and being different growing up. You must see how tremendously beneficial that would be. But what I'm asking you, I guess, is about the same as if I was a gay guy and I was up here in 1970 and I was saying to you that it's time for you and you and you to come out of the closet. I don't know who the autistic people are at the school. And I know that it is threatening and hard to think about coming out of the closet. I will say that some of you have talked to me and you've said that you fear if you admit that you're autistic, you will jeopardize your chances for tenure or promotion here. And maybe that fear's real. If it is, I think it's a problem that we have to confront. So we got the issues with acceptance of neurodiversity among the staff, making this college an accepting place, the admissions process. Once we've done all those things, and we've truly got a neurodiverse-friendly school, the final thing really is the civil rights aspect to this. And that is that for all the years that we've known about autism, autism has been presented as essentially a defect. It's presented as a way in which we are broken. Children learn that they are autistic because they fail in school, they fail at friendships, they get in trouble with the police, and their parents send them for testing, and they're told they're autistic, and it's all in the context of failure. So you can imagine people don't feel very good about that. So then, armed with the knowledge that kids are autistic, older people unwittingly use that knowledge against us, and they use it for systematized discrimination. They say, well, autistic people are socially blind, so we aren't good working with customers in stores, or we're not good in this job, we're not good in that job, we're autistic and we probably can never live independent lives or take care of ourselves. When I first learned about my own autism, I listened to that kind of stuff, and I absorbed it and I believed it. Now, I say it's bullshit. Because it's true that autism is disabling. It's true that there are many things about me that are broken and dysfunctional compared to a typical person. But I also see today that there are many things about me that are exceptional compared to a typical person. And I recognize that in most people with autism, we are a mix of disability and exceptionality. There are a few people on the autism spectrum who are almost exclusively exceptionally gifted, and there are a few people on the spectrum who are almost exclusively disabled. But you know what? That's true of any population group. If we just say, let's look at white males, let's look at Asian females, any group like that we take, we would find some really cognitively disabled people, some really, really bright people, and most everyone in the middle. And that's how we are. So to say that we are, as a group, unable to do these things is nothing more than systematized discrimination against us. So I was started to say that, and people say to me, well, no, you're wrong. That disability really is real. Autistic people do have social disabilities. So that's not discrimination, it's just true. And I still believed that for a while. But I learned from students at William and Mary, and I learned from civil rights advocates in black civil rights and Jewish civil rights how wrong that is. Because even though it's true that there are things we are less capable of doing, that thinking is the kind of thinking that was used in scientific papers in the 1950s that said that black people weren't as smart as white people, so they shouldn't do certain jobs. It was exactly the same thing. There have been scientific papers about defects in Jewish people, so Jewish people shouldn't do the same things. It's exactly the same. It's using science to hold us down. And I understand that the people who wrote those papers did so with the best of intentions. Maybe today we look back on them and we say they were racists. Racist or not, they really believed it. And they really believe it about autistic people today. So I'm here to say to you that yes, our disabilities are real, but those disabilities can be overcome. Look what the black community has done. In 1960, the black community listened to the arguments that black people weren't as smart and they couldn't do these things, and there was no response. They didn't have an answer. The civil rights movement came along. Black scholarship advanced. Today, we recognize that the reason that they didn't score as well on IQ test was because they weren't given good schooling. They didn't have the cultural opportunity. They didn't have any of the support. Well, what about us autistic people? When you look at autistic people, and we can't graduate from high school, let alone college, how can you expect us to score well on these tests? It is the very same thing. So what somebody looked at superficially and said they're not as good turns out to be really institutionalized discrimination. You take away the opportunity to be educated, then the people don't score as well, and you say they're dumber. It is the very same thing. So we have the opportunity here at William and Mary to stand up as civil rights leaders and say, we are going to start to change that in this institution. And we can be one of the first universities in this country to do that. And we can really stand up proudly. And I want to tell you, too, another thing that's really, really important about that, and it's something that I learned here at William and Mary. Warrenetta Mann here, who heads our counseling, she and I had talked at some stuff when I started out here, and I realized that both of us grew up in the South as segregation was unwinding. And I looked at her one day and I thought to myself, how is it that I'm a tall white male and I have this shitty self-image and I'm not a graduate of anything, and you're like a short black female and you have everything going for you. You have a doctorate from the best university, you're poised and confident, you're a leading person at a top university. How is it that that is reversed with what you'd expect between you and me? And I realized that the answer is culture. Because both of us grew up when people said hateful things about us. But the difference is, they said hateful things to her about being black, and they said hateful things to me for acting weird. So she could go home, and she could say what people said to her parents, and her parents could say, that's just ugly, mean, racist talk, but it's not true. And right here in our own town, these are the black leaders that you can admire, and you can be one of those leaders one day. And if we look back in history, these are all the great black people in history, and these are the things they've done. Great people are everywhere, and we have a solid, strong community, and we're a proud people. Now imagine my situation. I come home and I'm ridiculed. I'm told I'm retarded, sociopathic, stupid, mental. And what do my parents say? Well, you come from a long line of kids that bang their heads through the wall and smear poo on the walls. There was no knowledge of autism, and so with no knowledge, there was no way to build a culture. So what does that mean? That means that black students and Jewish students come to this university and they stand tall and proud because they're proud to be part of a culture. You can walk down halls here and there are African studies posters handwritten proudly on walls in buildings here. Where's the autism studies posters proudly on walls? Where's the autism community? If I say to you, who are the leaders in the Jewish community here? Who are the leaders in the black community here? Every one of you knows who you would look up to. Even if you're not part of those communities, you know the leaders exist. But if I say to you, who's the leader in the autism community, no one has the answers. And it's because of shame and lack of awareness. We need to overcome that. We need to stand proud about this, and we need to stand tall, and we need to build that community. And when we build that community, our students are going to leave this institution, and they're going to go out proud not only to be different, because not all our students are different. What we should be aspiring to do here is we should be aspiring to have every neurodiverse student who comes here leave this place proud to be what he is and not ashamed. And we should strive to have every person who graduates from this school leave this school with a clear understanding of the value of neurodiverse people in our society and a recognition of the civil rights issue. We talk here about being one of the top universities to graduate people into public service. You want to send people into public service? That is a mission to really be proud of if we can embrace that. So that's, I guess, my charge to you folks. You're supposed to relate to the alumni and relate to the donors and round up the money. And I think that this is a good cause to do it. I am happy to talk to any of you who have donors that you think can give some kind of major support to this school, that want to talk to a real autistic person on the faculty. To the extent that time permits, I will help you to do that. I'll help you to go out and answer your questions about this. I certainly will help and encourage in connecting autistic people on campus. I encourage all of you, just as I encourage our students, to look to the communities of Black and Jewish civil rights activism for guidance for what we could do in this, because they've been doing this longer than us, and they are far, far more successful. It's interesting to consider that the Jewish population in America is roughly the same as the autistic population. Now, you all have heard news headlines about autistic people involved in murders, shootings, all kinds of bad stuff. Think about those headlines that you read about the autistic people, and imagine how it would play if you substituted Jew for autistic in those headlines. You all know the answer. Those reporters would be on the street the next day. So people can say stuff about autistic people that they would never dare say about Black or Jewish people in this society. And that's because we haven't learned to stand up for ourselves yet. But at this college, we can be at the beginning of the movement to change that. And I hope that you'll all embrace that mission. So there it is, I guess. What do you got for questions now? I'm supposed to leave time for questions, right? So yeah, we have time.
Thank you so much. Anybody have any questions? I have to bring the mic to you because we have 17 people that are joining us remotely. Yes.
So in a great deal of our work, we are charged with engaging alumni, parents, friends, in the life of the college, bringing them back, getting them excited about the college in the hopes that, yes, they will support the institution. How can we do a better job of creating, whether they be maybe events or, virtual opportunities, things like that, that engage our neurodiverse alumni and make them want to engage with us? I guess I'm thinking more on the autism spectrum too.
Well, one thing that we could do is we could collect writings on neurodiversity, and we could make some kind of a guide to neurodiversity. The college has already links to articles I've written on neurodiversity, but we should have articles that other people have written about neurodiversity also. So when somebody talks to one of you and asks what neurodiversity is, we should have a good place to send them where they can really learn about it. I think that that actually people today don't read so much, and maybe one thing we could do is you guys could get one of the video folks like this fellow here, and you could get one of you to maybe ask me questions. And you could make a video interview with me talking about neurodiversity. And I think that you could probably take the stuff like I said to you now, and you could make that into like half a dozen like 3-minute videos about different things. And you could put that on the website. And ideally, you could get other people besides me, like Joel Carver is our student leader now for the neurodiversity group. So you could ask him what it means to be at William and Mary. You could get folks that are parents of students. I think you could probably get even Joel's parents and ask them to talk about what it means to them. And I think that if you had a bunch of videos like that, you could set your website up if you had a clever programmer, which hopefully the college employs a few of, and you could set it up so the videos kind of rotated through so that when people looked at it, they would just, there'd be different videos all the time. I can help you record them if you can do the rest, and we can find those other people. I think that would be a very constructive start. So.
Awesome. Anybody else? Yes.
So as I told John, my son has Asperger's, so I apologize if my voice feels a little emotional right now. But the one thing that I think John asked about, how do we talk to our constituents about neurodiversity, and especially people who have young children, I think it's very important to talk to our alumni base about how forward-thinking and how revolutionary William and Mary is on neurodiversity. People of my age who have young children, he's right. I think before my son was diagnosed, it was very shameful. In fact, his grandparents still kind of talked about it like cancer, like they whisper autism. It's like, he has autism. But people of my generation and forward, it's much more a part of our lives. So I think it's something to be celebrated that William and Mary is on the forefront of this. Also, I would love for us to learn more about what William and Mary is doing in primary and secondary education with children who have autism, because that's actually where I think the issues start, in trying to take kids who are different and forcing them into the public school system of trying to sit still and trying to be typical. And trying to force them into being who we think is a perfect model citizen, because I know that my son has many gifts that, thankfully, because of a university, he was diagnosed at a very young age and has been able to go through a tremendous amount of therapy, and so he's able to live in that world a little bit better than people who aren't diagnosed. But again, I think that it's really an opportunity for us in advancement to tell people what William and Mary is doing in this, that I think can really be the key.
I think the challenge for you advancement folks really is you got to go out and get some millions of dollars of endowment for this, because right now we are full of ideas for things that we could do to advance neurodiversity. We could have our neurodiversity college students go be mentors in high school. We need support to get them there. We need rides. We need faculty support to do it. We know that we need improvements or enhancements in counseling and coaching. We have programs, for example, that we have developed through autism research to help autistic people make friends, to help overcome the challenges of executive function that are a cause probably of a lot of people who fail at William and Mary. So we know that there are solutions out there to many of our problems and to many of our needs. We do not have any money to pursue them. Right now, William and Mary has a small amount of money to bring me here as kind of a figurehead for this thing. But you need much more than me. You need people who are working full-time on this, and those people, ideally, should be autistic people. I didn't talk much about my government service, but I have actually had the great privilege of being invited into steadily more and more significant government committees, and now I serve on the committee that makes the strategic plan for autism for the U.S. government, and I have also served on the steering committee that defines autism for the World Health Organization's ICF Corsets project. And one of the things I say to those folks is that a change is really coming, and it is time for people in the medical and educational communities to realize that they need to be turning to the autistic people and seeking guidance, because what's going to come next is going to be oversight. And if they don't want to accept guidance, oversight's going to put them out the door. And I think that is going to be a hard truth for many people in education and medicine. But I would say to you that the situation we have now with oversight of research and education policy for autism is just like saying that we have a problem in the Jewish community in Norfolk and we're going to turn to the Catholic bishop for the answer. It is unthinkable. You do not do that. And for some reason, that obvious truth is lost when it comes to autism, but that time's going to change. It is absolutely going to change. And I think that if you can bring in funding and we can get people to work on this, we can do something really great here. Because there are universities all over the country that boast about having autism centers of excellence and autism research centers. And I don't say that, to criticize them. I don't mean ill by saying, universities like to boast about what they're proud of. But the truth is, those institutions are mostly dedicated to unraveling the medical foundations of autism. Many of them are very specifically targeted at severe disability. They are not doing work that will materially change the lives of any of you or any of our students. They are also not doing anything that changes the cultural perception of autism. If anything, they reinforce the concept of autism as a disease that needs to be cured. We have the opportunity to stand up here and say, autistic people were part of our foundation when we started, and autistic people are part of us today. And we can build a culture for autistic people, which I suggest to you, for those of us who live with autism, is far more important than most of the research being conducted. Yep.
Yeah, I'm Karen Wolf. I'm the director of the Omohundro Institute, which is how I know many of you, but I'm also the co-chair of the Neurodiversity Working Group. And I wanted to, first of all, thank Susie Armstrong, who's been amazing. And the money that we do have, actually, for neurodiversity is in large part because Susie has worked with neurodiversity so assiduously and with great care. So I really appreciate that. And the second thing I wanted to say is that 4 summers ago now, the Alumni Magazine ran a story on the Neurodiversity Initiative at William & Mary. And after that story, I had a lot of email from alums actually saying, I didn't realize, I was here in the 70s, it's so great to see William & Mary doing that. We didn't really have the capacity to do anything with that. But it's an interesting, it's interesting to think about maybe if that story, if you guys wanted to send it out again and just say, we're just reaching out to our, to our alumni base, and we're interested in hearing more from you. We have a small kind of list of people who get in touch, but a lot of them are alums who were diagnosed later in their life, but we're also hearing now from alums with kids. So those are just some quick thoughts.
Now, if Karen had made a point of thanking Susie there, I don't want you to think that I'm like criticizing you for not having raised these millions of dollars already, because you didn't really have a clue probably about any of this until came along to talk to you about it. I really think that we have the opportunity to be the first in this country to do this, and that's a really significant thing. And there's another thing that's really important. When Karen and I went and talked to the admissions people, the admissions guy was really sort of steadfast about one thing. He said, well, our real thing here is we want to find the students, we want to find the student applicants who show the greatest potential for excellence. And this is absolutely a top-ranked university. Right now in this country, there are a number of autism programs in universities that don't really have the weight of academic credentials of William & Mary. The primary, like for example, there are schools like Landmark in Vermont, which is a really good school for people with significant challenges who want to go to college. But the thing is, the primary criteria for admission to Landmark is that you have an autism or ADHD diagnosis and you be sufficiently challenged that you would not be able to go to a conventional college. And for that reason, a landmark degree does not have a great deal of weight in the employment world as much as people would wish it otherwise. This place is very different. So if we can show that we can put together a program to welcome autistic and otherwise different students into a campus of this caliber, and we can help those students succeed, and we can build a culture. The thing that's important that we can do that a place like Landmark can't do, Landmark and the other colleges like it are very small schools. They can't send thousands of people out into public service. We can. This university has generations of experience sending tens of thousands out into public service. So we have a tremendous opportunity. And if we can do that and we can really build the college's reputation for excellence by bringing these people back in, I just think that's a really great mission. And I hope that all of you we can do it, you know. I just hope we can. The reason that I am here is because of my family connection to this school and because I believe in what you're doing. I could certainly be pushing the idea of neurodiversity at plenty of other schools. It'd probably be closer to home for me than coming 6 hours on an airplane to come down here. But I believe in this place, and I don't have a desire to do that. And I believe in this place because my family started out here. And I think that if I can show that my family were winners here at the establishment of this school, and I can come in and help with this program, that's a thing I can be really, really proud of. So that's why I'm here with you doing it. Yeah?
Thank you. For the gift officers in the room, I just wanted to mention I do have an Opportunities for Giving document where we've started to spell out some of the ways that alumni and parents potentially can support the Neurodiversity Initiative. It is operating on a shoestring right now. It's really a cross-campus effort. I think just recently, just within the past year, there's been an admin person hired to support the program, but otherwise it's really very ad hoc. But some of the giving opportunities include hosting speakers on campus, certainly support for the visiting scholar position. And there are, I think it's a strength that there is this cross-campus collaboration because there is interesting work going on at the School of Education, the Center for Gifted Education, certainly within the Counseling Center. Even the law school has a special education and law advocacy program. So my impression just in working with the neurodiversity working group so far is that William & Mary is really doing something distinctive here. And Karen, I think maybe can speak more to this than I can, but there are other universities, your MITs, maybe your Caltechs that have supported to some degree the student population, but I think we're fairly unique for a humanities or an arts and sciences, a liberal arts institution to have this kind of emerging program. So,
you know what's different? People often cite places like MIT for neurodiverse students, but the thing about MIT that's different from here is MIT was always a geeked out place. It always had autistic faculty members and it always had autistic students. So MIT hasn't really changed a whole lot that I've seen in the last 10 years because it was always a bunch of autistic people in those scientific trades. We're doing something really totally different here, building a neurodiversity community. I think it would be safe to say that a person who was autistic, who was interested in history, would not find a particularly welcome home at MIT because there isn't any institutional thing for autistic people. It's just that if you're in computer science at MIT, yes, all your professors are autistic and all the other students are autistic and it's okay. So we're doing something pretty different. And I know, and I go and I speak up there. I do continuing medical education with MIT and Harvard and stuff, and I do those every year. So I sort of do see that that's a distinct difference in the institutions. And, yep.
I will be the first to admit that I don't know a lot about this area, but I'm a frontline fundraiser, and I wonder if you could give those of us who are out meeting with our alumni, some of whom statistically I'm sure are along the autism spectrum, if you could give us some insights into how we can best relate to those alumni, because typically in a development call, you know, there's some chit chat, some socializing, some getting to know one another as you build that rapport, and sometimes in my experience that falls flat. And maybe it's me, you know, I mean, sometimes there's no chemistry, but it may be because someone I'm speaking with is on the autism spectrum, or the way I'm giving them the information is not in a way that they can effectively take that information in. But if you can give us some insights on how we can be successful in those calls, that would be really helpful to me.
Well, one thing I would say is that if you're not an autistic person, you can engage people probably in these conversations more successfully than I can most of the time. With autistic people, there is a high likelihood that I can engage them more successfully than you, but we are only a small percentage of the population. So if you can be more successful 98% of the time, you still have the vast advantage in doing your job. As far as tips for how for you to engage autistic people, I think that sometimes at these things I become inspired and I say things that are useful or insightful, and then I don't remember what I said if you ask me an hour later. But I have come to learn that Karen here watches me also, and it's highly likely that she could give you tips based on her own experience plus her observations, even though I will forget them. So I actually do not have any advice to offer you, but hopefully she would. And so there, I guess, yeah.
I could say one really quick thing. It's true. Usually I just come along as a fan, you know.
Well, you're not. No, you do. I mean, I wouldn't even do this if it weren't for you. You're the heart of this thing.
But one quick thing I will say is that I've noticed when I'm trying to interact with donors, I think Susie can attest to this, is just the most important thing is not to make an assumption that everyone is the same. And I think this is something that the Neurodiversity Working Group is trying to talk about all across campus. And we're talking about first-year experience and orientation. Not everybody loves rah-rah. Not everybody loves loud. Not every kid likes to go to Chuck E. Cheese for birthdays. And all of that pertains, I mean, really, I'd run out with my ears covered screaming, frankly, sensory overload, no way. But I think the same thing pertains with donors. Not every donor is, and you know this because you're all really intuitive people, not everyone relates the same way, not everyone takes in information the same, and it's totally okay, in fact, really preferable to say, is this a helpful conversation for you, or would it be more helpful if I send some information to you this way? And it's totally okay to say, you know, I feel like I'm not giving you the right information, or I feel like I'm not sharing the right thing. Could I do this differently? That's okay. People who are really intuitive people are counting on the other person to intuit back. But if you're not an intuitive person, just saying it straight out, it's great. I refer to this when we do presentations as the kind of elevator thing, or the 6 inches between people. Why did I come to this chair and not sit right up next to Stacy? Because there is some kind of rule. You see, you guys left chair space, right? There's some kind of intuitive rule. If you're not an intuitive person, you have no idea that you shouldn't just come right and sit here like this, right? But it would be completely okay to say, you know what, that's a little too close. Could I have a little space? To be explicit is okay if you're not an intuitive person. So I guess that's actually 2 tips. One is don't presume that everybody's the same. And the second is just be explicit. And to be polite and explicit is really a gift to people who need that. So.
You know, Karen, for those of you who don't know how she got all this together, when I first started speaking about autism, I spoke at a school, and her kid heard me. And she asked me about coming to speak here, and she didn't know anything of my family's connection to Williamsburg and William and Mary. But the thing is, she has always been really a passionate believer in this neurodiversity cause and bringing it to this college, and I absolutely am only here because of her efforts. And she's really the one who has gone out and worked with youth development folks and helped chase money down from donors, and she worked with the provost to get somebody to get the school to appoint an outlaw like me to come and teach, and she worked with these other faculty to organize these courses we could teach. And she's really the one who has pulled all of that together. And I think that both of us are doing this because we believe in it really a lot. We really believe in the rightness of this cause and the importance of this cause. I would say to you, when you ask like how to engage people and how to raise money, think about how'd you finance black civil rights? How did you finance black studies here? Surely there must be some institutional knowledge of how that was done years ago. And can we learn from that? Because certainly these other civil rights movements that have come before us, we've got to be able to build on that. Now, I don't really have any knowledge of that. And some of this stuff, like what she was talking to you about, even though I'm a really articulate speaker and I'm good talking to you here, I'm still disabled in other ways. But working together, it works well. It's a good thing, and that's an example, I guess, of what could do. And so anyway, you should all be thankful to her for
Just have time for
doing
one more
this.
comment from Kim.
Hi, this is on a personal level. My son, too, is autistic, but more on the gray spectrum area. So he's 20 and has aged out of the school system. He went through a transitional program into real life. But now it's hard finding resources for his growth. I know there's a lot in there, but he's not on the college track, so to speak. Any suggestions for resources for social education? Like how does he keep going?
Well, in Virginia, they have a Department of Vocational Rehabilitation that someone with an autism diagnosis should be able to get support in community college or vocational training. Whether you can actually cause that to happen, I'm not sure, but that's the idea. In my government service, one of the greatest problems that we currently recognize for the autistic population is the essential absence of services to transition people from childhood dependence in the public schools, where you have special ed law that provides for all of these services, and most autism services in this country are provided through the public schools, and then that just terminates with a bang. And we have no nationwide transition plan or support. The state methods for doing it are highly variable, and none of them are very good. That is really a national disgrace, and it's only being recognized as such now. So I can tell you that I'm doing my best on a national level to change that, but I don't have an answer for you right here in Williamsburg, except to make noise and more objectionable and misbehaving you are, the more likely they are to give you accommodation for the kid and get rid of you, and well, I mean, it's really right. You go right through, and now you just got to be just loud and disruptive, and they'll eventually give you something to get you out of there. And I don't know of a better way to do it. So,
Just wondered if I was missing something.
no, you're really not. And if any of you are curious about what we're doing, if you have like serious geek interest in this, if you want to read our strategic plan and our advances, you can go to our website, which is IACC, which stands for Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, .hhs, which is Department of Health and Human Services.gov for the U.S. government. And we publish the summary of advances in research, and we also publish the strategic plan for autism. And the strategic plan that we will be publishing in February of next year will include, for the first time, a strategic plan for the United States that goes beyond scientific research, and it goes into treatment, transition, and adult services. So for the first time, our country is publishing a strategic plan for autism that will speak to your concern and the concerns of older autistic people beyond your son. And I think that's an accomplishment, but it's only, making a plan is the first step. We got a long way to go. But this place, we're all in the beginning of this. So, are we out of question time? I got to go anyway because I got to get a ride to get to the plane.
Thank you so much
all
for
right,
being
so
here.
thank you all for joining me. And if I can help any of you, you can write me at jerobson@wm.edu, and Karen is here all the time, and she can probably give you suggestions and stuff too. So you should probably thank her for doing this too.
Yes, thank you. All right, you guys, it's so good for you to come out. We've got a lot of ideas. We've got a lot of plans. We've got a lot of things ahead of us. And go. Go Tribe. Thanks.
So you think that was